Hello and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Arteza 60-piece watercolor set, and I've been looking forward to testing these as my first gouache set was the Arteza brand gouache. As a personal choice, I did put these in watercolor half pans, and I do believe you could probably fill about 2 of those with one of these tubes. One thing I like about Arteza is that their boxes contain a lot of information. For example, the back of the box shows the light fastness, transparency levels, and pigments used in each paint color. The downside is that even though the tubes display the Arteza color code and the paint color name, the box only shows the Arteza color code. So if you need to color match your paint, you're going to want to make sure that you look at these tubes and don't throw them away until you've already matched them. So right off the bat, there's a little bit of a red flag, and that's that a lot of these colors contain the pigment PW6, which is a white pigment. True watercolors don't use any white pigment, as you're supposed to use the white of the paper and watering them down to create lighter shades. On the left, you'll see the ones that have the white pigment, and on the right are the ones without it. Because the watercolors on the left use the PW6 white pigment, they're not actually considered watercolors, but they are considered gouache. And almost all of the colors that include PW6 are opaque, which defeats the point of them being watercolors to begin with. In separating out these colors, I found that 35 of them are not watercolors at all because they do use PW6, which means that over half of the set is not a truly translucent watercolor, but is instead a gouache. And while this doesn't really bother me because I love gouache and I know how to use it, this is something that you should keep in mind if you're not familiar using opaque paints. Now, I did check their 24 color set to see how many of those contain PW6, and only 4 out of the 24 paints did use that white pigment. So if you want watercolors that act more like watercolors, the 24 color set might be better for you. But if you don't really care about translucency because you just want a lot of color options, then the 60-piece set is probably the best option for you. Now here, I messed up and painted the same color in 2 spots, but I was able to test how well the paint lifted by adding water and dabbing it with a paper towel. The color came off a good amount, and had I repeated the process some more, I really do think it would barely leave a stain, so if you're an artist interested in using lifting techniques, this might be a good paint for you. Looking at the cost, the 60 color set is about $42, which comes out to 70 cents per tube, and these tubes hold about 11 milliliters of paint. The Royal Talons gouache that I usually buy is about $8 per tube, with each tube holding 20 milliliters of paint, and the Schmincke half pans that I get cost about $8 each, whereas a half pan using these Arteza watercolors would cost about 35 cents. Because of that, I think these are really cost effective for what you're getting. No, they aren't going to be fully comparable to these expensive brands, but they are pretty good paints, and I've had no real problems using them. I previously mentioned the ideas of translucency and opaqueness, so I thought it would be a good idea to test these paints over some black lines to demonstrate what I mean. Typically, when painted over a black line using watercolor, the line will show through because the paint is translucent. Meanwhile, if you painted over the same line with gouache, you would not see the black line very clearly or even at all. Again, opaqueness doesn't bother me since I'm used to using gouache, but if you want to use the more opaque colors in a watercolor painting, you'll want to make sure that you water them down quite a bit, that way you can still layer things like a watercolor. A rule of thumb for this set is that if the color uses white to make, it's going to be opaque. For example, many of the pinks, light blues, and lighter greens are all opaque. I also noticed that many of the primary colors are translucent, so your reds, darker blues, and yellows will be more layerable as watercolors than the greens, oranges, or purples will be. I do feel like the information on the box is accurate when it comes to transparency levels, as I previously mentioned that the colors labeled with PW6 white are also labeled as the least transparent. So if you aren't sure about the translucency of a color, make sure that you check the back of the box. Going back to lifting qualities, I wanted to dive further into how well these paints lift from the page. I found that each one does stain a bit, with the red and yellow having the least noticeable amount of color lifting. If you use lifting techniques, I believe you'll have the easiest time lifting the blue paints from the paper, though this could be that the blue is just darker than the yellow, so it's easier to see the final result. If you work in thin layers, you'll likely have less staining, and if you need to cover a dark stain, you'll be able to do so pretty easily using the colors that contain the PW6 white pigment. Let's talk about colors. With 60 colors to choose from and many more mixing options, you can create almost any color you want. I was hesitant to list out every color in the set because there are so many, but I am going to try. So this set includes Titanium white, light apricot, Naples yellow, lemon yellow, yellow pale, gamboge, yellow ochre, saffron orange yellow, orange red, spiced apple, vermilion red, scarlet red, crimson red, apricot, ballerina pink, peach, bubblegum pink, blush pink, neon pink, rose, violet, tulip, mauve, lavender, lilac, violet, indigo, phthalo blue, Prussian blue, ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, Aegon blue, cerulean blue, stone blue, sky blue, ice blue, deep green, seaweed, mint green, viridian green, light green, sap green, olive green, pear green, lime green, eucalyptus, jade green, sage green, taupe, latte brown, tan, toffee, wineberry, bordeaux red, burnt sienna, burnt umber, raw umber, sepia gray, and noir. So there are plenty of color options, with each primary color being well represented, and there are also quite a few natural and whimsical greens available. One thing I thought was pretty neat is that there are so many browns, as I usually only see umbers or siennas included in watercolor sets. And my personal favorite colors here are the lavender and also the ice blue. I was disappointed to see that there wasn't a Payne's Gray, since that's a color that I usually use in a lot of my work, but I do think it would be easy to make something similar to that color using blue and black. I did make 2 different paintings using these paints to show you kind of how to use them, or at least how I would use them, and also to talk about how they apply on the page. If you're someone who's used to getting cheaper watercolors, seeing that they're somewhat opaque, and finding out that they're really chalky, and because of that you're worried that these are going to be chalky, you do not need to worry about that with these paints. Chalky watercolors are a result of companies not using a lot of pigment and instead using a lot of fillers like chalk in their paint to make them more voluminous. This causes the paints to have a dry, sandy-like texture, be more opaque but not consistently so, and also not have as much pigment or color that pops through, so you have to layer them over and over again so that you can get any color in. Although I'm sure Arteza does use fillers within making their paints, these are not opaque because of anything like chalk or filler. As we've said a lot of times previously in this video, these are opaque because they use the pigment PW6, which is a white pigment. That means that these paints are not sandy in texture at all. They are very creamy, very smooth, and also very vibrant. They don't lack pigment like some of the cheaper watercolors do. I found that these were pretty easy to reactivate both in the pan and on the page, but they don't have as much of an issue with reactivating the underlayers in a way that would be a negative thing. Before using this set, I was using a 12 count Paul Rubens watercolor set, which I can't find on Amazon anymore, but the glitter version cost about $40, which is just a few dollars less than this set. And I found that that one did have a problem with re-wetting some of the lower layers and mixing them with my other colors in ways that I really did not want, and this Arteza set doesn't have that problem in my experience. Now, some of the reviews that I was seeing for this watercolor set were saying that they were really disappointed that these are more of a student grade set than a professional set, and I'm gonna be brutally honest here, I don't know what they were thinking they were getting when they bought a 60 color watercolor set for $42. I've mentioned it in some of my previous videos, but I am a gallery artist and a published illustrator, so I do feel like I am somewhat of a professional and I know somewhat of the kinds of tools that we would use. Earlier I mentioned that the Royal Talons gouache that I get is about $8 all the way up to maybe $15 per tube, and then those Schmincke watercolors that I have, a half pan of that is $8 per half pan for the ones that I get. These cost $1.75 per fluid ounce, and each tube has 0.4 ounces in them, so you are not paying very much at all per tube on these. Because of that, you cannot go into messing with these watercolors expecting professional level paints. They are not professional level paints. As far as I could find, Arteza has 3 different quality levels that they make, starting with the Classic series, next is the Premium series, and then the final one is Studio series. These watercolors fall into their Premium series, and as far as I saw, they don't make studio artist level watercolors. While these paints are decently light fast, this means that your paintings aren't going to be archivable long term. They might have some different colors that change over time, and they're probably not going to last through the next 800 years for archaeologists to dig up. But this doesn't mean that they aren't still pretty good quality, or that you can't use them to make paintings that you want to sell. Overall, I really like this set even with its quirks, and I would recommend it to other people if they want to try new colors or try a mixture of watercolors and gouache. I'd love to hear your thoughts if you've ever tried Arteza watercolors before. If you have anything you want me to review, let me know, and I will see you next time.